U.S. President Joe Biden is expected to sign an executive order to crack down on asylum requests at the southern border. Well, the order could restrict the number of arrivals at the U.S.-Mexico crossing after a certain daily number is reached. And there's been a record number of people attempting to cross into the U.S. in recent years, and the issue has been a huge hot-button topic in the political campaign ahead of November's election. All right, let's get you more. We can talk now to Al Jazeera's White House correspondent, Kimberly Halkett, standing by. Kimberly, what more do we know about this proposal?
Yeah, well, we're expecting something to come down in an hour or so. And what we're expecting is that this will come in the form of an executive order. Why? Because legislation seems to be elusive here in the United States. Apologies, there's a lot of nature out here, including hornets. The truth is here in the U.S. Congress, the Democrats and Republicans have been working on this for about 20 years or more. They've not been able to achieve it. So Joe Biden says he's going to take matters into his own hands through an executive order. But as you point out, the numbers have been surging as high as up to 12,000 illegal crossings into the United States at its height last December. So what the proposal here is under the executive order would be to prevent asylum seekers from entering the United States. What this would be is a temporary sealing of the border, preventing those from entering and returning them to their countries. But the Democrats, as you'll recall, really criticized Donald Trump when he tried to do this back in 2018. In fact, so much so, this led to the federal courts blocking the Trump administration from doing that. So there is a little bit of criticism. In fact, there could even be some court challenges of the attempt by the Biden administration to do this very same thing. And they're anticipating this as well. But the Biden administration insists that this is different. This is more of a scalpel approach, they insist, versus what they call a sledgehammer approach by the Trump administration. Why they say this is different is that this will allow those who have maybe medical emergencies or minors, for example, or even those who need or are victims of human trafficking, if you will, they will be allowed to come through, but albeit with much more vigorous screening.
Right, because, I mean, some of the critics have already come out and said, Kimberly, that this is just a rehashing of a Trump policy. But you point out that there might be some exemptions there. Politically, however, how does this play into the race and Biden's reelection bid?
Yeah, because the nuances are pretty minor. It's pretty much the same policy for all intents and purposes. And what this really is politics. I mean, let's face it, November is right around the corner. It's a presidential election. And it's no coincidence this is coming on the heels of a criminal conviction when the fact is that Joe Biden's main rival for the presidential race, Donald Trump, has just received that coming down and his sentencing is imminent. So the time is right for him to really seize on what he knows is a big issue for conservative voters and try and grab some of those voters, even if it is his own policy that they're concerned about. And that's what Joe Biden is doing right now. The fact is that conservative voters who don't like Joe Biden's border policies, but maybe don't want to vote for a convicted felon, well, this is the time to grab them. And that's what he's doing right now.
Kimberly Halkett reporting. Thank you. And let's take a closer look now at the situation on the southern border. Back in 2013, officials recorded an average of 39,000 encounters every month until 2021, when the numbers started to rise rapidly. In December last year, that figure reached nearly 302,000. That's an all-time record. Now, in terms of who's making the crossing, there are significantly fewer Mexican nationals. The biggest increase has been in Venezuelan citizens, from nearly 0 to more than 10%. All this putting pressure on the American immigration system. The number of pending cases jumped dramatically from about 344,000 in 2013 to, get this, 2.1 million last year. All right, we can talk now to Leon Fresco, an immigration attorney and former U.S. Deputy Assistant Attorney General in charge of immigration. And he joins us now from Washington, D.C. Sir, a very warm welcome to Al Jazeera. Will this curb the number of immigrants trying to make their way north of the Mexican border?
If it is allowed to be implemented, it will curb the amount of people coming across from the Mexican border into the United States with frivolous asylum claims. But there are two key factors to watch. One, when the lawsuits are filed, will the courts allow this policy to go through? Because there are very strong arguments which were made in 2019 against the Trump administration, which would be repeated again in 2024, that the president does not have the authority to prevent people who have already entered the United States from asking for asylum. He can stop them before they've entered at the port of entry or at an airport, but he can't stop them once they've entered the United States from seeking asylum. That was the problem in 2019. And then secondly, if they can clear that obstacle, will the government of Mexico cooperate in allowing non-Mexicans to be deported into Mexico? So this would include these Venezuelans that were discussed, or people from China or Central America, or many others that are making this trip into the United States. If neither of those two things are part of this process, then the measure will not be successful.
And sir, why do we keep seeing record number of people heading to the U.S. in spite of ever more draconian measures?
Well, the main reason is because the U.S. economy, even in this sort of flagging economic worldwide conditions, continues to outpace the growth of many other countries. And so there is still demand for labor in the United States, and people continue to try to fill that demand for labor until people really either don't think they'll be able to get in, or they think that if they get in, they will not be able to access a job. One or the other, you will still see people trying to enter the United States.
And that begs the question, of course, I mean, the Trump administration and now the Biden administration wants to shut the border. How realistic is it that the border can be shut?
Well, the border could be shut if you had a congressional proposal that actually had a congressional law that the courts would then have to defer to, that said, here is how we're going to operate our border. And then you would also need cooperation from Mexico. And so you'd have to give them some sort of package whereby you could actually repatriate people to Mexico and then give them the resources they needed to repatriate the people back to wherever their home of nationality is. But without that, those two long-term solutions, you're always going to see these stopgap measures. And it's very likely the courts are not going to permit this because they're going to say that Congress hasn't given this authority to do this. And so it's really going to be a matter of the Biden administration saying, you see, I tried to do everything I could, but really we need Congress to act. And so now it's on the Republicans to try to give me the authority I need to do this.
Now, you've alluded on several occasions during this conversation to Mexico, of course, a very important partner there. This comes and will come in the wake of the Mexican elections. What do you make of the timing of this executive order, and how might the incoming Mexican president respond to these measures?
Well, the timing was clearly done in a way that it wouldn't influence who won the race. So they waited until after the election to decide this. I think that was absolutely done on purpose. But now the issue is going to be that the federal government is going to say to the newly elected president of Mexico, if you don't help us cooperate with this, there are going to be other measures that we're going to have to take in order to persuade you that this is in your best interest. When it was the Trump administration, they threatened large tariffs on automobiles coming in from Mexico and into the United States. Perhaps President Biden would do something with regard to foreign aid. But one way or the other, those sanctions would be put in if the Mexican government isn't going to assist on this sort of regional migration effort.
All right, Leon Fresco, immigration attorney and former U.S. Deputy Assistant Attorney General. Sir, thank you so much. Greatly appreciate it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.